Good morning, Rabbi. Baruch Hashem.
Okay, so where we are is the very top of Chav Zayin Chavav Amid Beis, and we talked about what you have to go back for and what you don't have to go back for. And we ended with a refutation of the idea that if you said the Havdalah in the wrong Shemona Esrei, you don't have to go back. So if you had to daven 2 weekday Mayrivs because you missed Mincha on Shabbat, you don't have to go back. So that's where we're up to. So we're up to the question, was the statement, Itmar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, discussing what is the source of the Gemara. What is the source of the Tefillot? That's the question. We want to know what the source of the Tefillot are. So, Omar. So Itmar, we learned a debate among the Amoraim, the Chachamim of the Gemara. Rabbi Yisrael B'Chanina Omar Tefilos Avos Tiknu. Rabbi Yisrael B'Chanina says that the Tefillot were created by the Avot, which means to say that even though it only becomes a regular obligation much later in the time of the Anshe Knesset Segedela, Ezra, the men of the Great Assembly, at the beginning of the second Beit HaMikdash, nevertheless, the fact is that we find that the Avos prayed at the times that they seem to have been common for them to daven at the times that we daven Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv, as we'll see. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Tefilos Keneged Tamidim Tiknum, that the regular Tefilos, Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv, have, again, the Shemona Esreis have been made corresponding to the Korbanot. Now, there is an error that people often make, assuming that the Tefillot were created to replace the Korbanot. That's not really true. It's true that after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, we only have the Tefillot left. But when it says that the Tefillot were made corresponding to the Korbanot, this was at the beginning of the second Beit HaMikdash, when there was like 400 years of the second Beit HaMikdash to go. But rather, the Tefillot that the sages required, we say, the Shemon Esrei, the prayers, the sages required us to say that existed during the times of the second Beit HaMikdash were created corresponding to the Korbanot that were also being brought at that time. That's a big mistake that people tend to make. In other words, when the Korbanot were being brought in the Beit HaMikdash, Jews all over the world would daven at those times. And Yeshua ben Levi says that the tefillah were made corresponding to the Tamidim. There is a morning prayer and an afternoon morning korban, Ola, a burnt offering that belongs to the whole Jewish community, the public korban that's brought in the morning, and one that is brought in the afternoon. And therefore we daven Shachar Mincha. We'll see, according to this scheme, Ma'ariv corresponds to something that didn't happen every day, which is why it was optional. So Tanya Kavase, the Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanin. We learned a Braita, again, material from the Chachamim of the Mishnah that was later, that was not redacted into the Mishnah. So we learned like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, and we also learned like Rishwa ben Levi. In other words, we have a Braita that supports each of them, as we shall see. So Tanya Kavase, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Tanya Kavase, Rabbi Yisrael ben Chanina, we learned a Braita that matches the opinion of Rabbi Yisrael ben Chanina. These are Rabbi because they are Chachamim of Eretz Yisrael. The Chachamim will appear primarily in the Talmud Yerushalmi. Avram Tikein Tefillah Shachris. Avram established Shachris. Shana Mars, it says, Vayashkim Avram Babaika. Avram got up in the morning. Elamokim Asher Amad Sham. What's talking about Sodom, that Avram got up in the morning to see the destruction of Sodom, and he went to the place where he stood. What did Avram do before? He prayed for the people of Sodom. He asked Hashem to save them if there were any righteous people. Ve'ein amida l'tefillah. And the term amida means prayer. In other words, when it says he stood there, we're not so interested in whether he was sitting or standing, but that he did something called amidah. And the term amidah means prayer. Shenamar, as it says in Tehillim, Vayamai Pinchas liyapalel. Pinchas arose and prayed before he slew Zimri and Cosby. Yitzchak came to Tefillas Mincha. Yitzchak established the Tefillah of Mincha. Shenamar, as it says, Vayetze Yitzchak l'suach basada lifnei sarev. Yitzchak went out to meditate to discuss with Hashem, to meditate or to talk, or l'suach means to talk, in the field by the evening, and that's when Rivka comes. So he didn't know Rivka was coming that day. So why did he go out into the field? Because he typically prayed at that time. Shenamar tefillah lani kiyato, a prayer of the poor man when he is about to expire, when he's fainting. Before Hashem yishbech sicha, he pours out his speech. So the term sicha, which means speech in general, is used specifically for tefillah. So why was Yitzchak out there in the field in the evening? Presumably because this is something he did regularly. Since he didn't say when to talk with someone, who is there available that you can talk to anytime you want? It's Hashem. So presumably this was a practice that he did regularly. Yaakov Tikkun Tfilas Avis, Yaakov established a evening prayer, Shinamar, as it says, Vayivka B'makom, he encountered in that place the Yolansham. So it says Vayivka as if it's a verb. So what does it mean? He encountered in it, but it doesn't say Vayivka Hamakom, he encountered the place. Here's the key point. It doesn't say Vayivka Hamakom. It doesn't say he encountered the place. It says Vayivka B'makom. He encountered in the place, which could be read Vayivka, and he did Yivka. He did Pegia B'makom in that place. In other words, the bet, which is in, works well if Pegia is sort of a independent action rather than a dependent action. If it was merely meant he encountered the place, it should say he encountered the place. When it says he encountered B'makom in the place, it sounds like he did encounter it. What is a encountering? So we find Shinam, as it says, Hashem tells Yirmiyahu that the fate of the people is sealed. Do not daven for the people. And do not raise for them praise, tefillah, and prayer. And do not encounter me. So we see that Pegia is a concept of prayer. So since in all these cases, if it was just happenstance, we could have used different words because of the grammatical structure. The assumption is, in the case of Avram, we know he prayed for Sodom. In the case of Yitzchak, l'suach is to speak. It doesn't say to speak to who. So presumably it's something he did regularly, and he spoke to Hashem. And in the case of Yaakov, vayivka b'makom, it should say vayivka hamakom. He encountered the place. Instead, it says he encountered in the place. Encountering seems to be a form of independent activity, which we know from Yirmiyahu that Pegia is a term used for tefillah. Tanya Kavasa Rabbi Shua ben Levi. We also learned to Brisa that is in accordance with the position of Yeshua ben Levi, that the men of the Great Assembly, the Pancha Knesset Agdola, they created the tefillot. They created both the language of the tefillot and the timing of the tefillot corresponding to the korbanot. So we have a brisa. The brisa says, "Mipnei ma omru tefillas hashachar chatzos." Why do we say that the morning prayer goes dafka, the morning Shmon Esrei goes till midday? Because the morning korban could be brought technically until midday. Rabbi Yehuda says Adar Brachot until 4 hours into the day. It's even though technically you could bring it till midday, and then Beit HaMikdash was always brought by the 4th hour of the day. So since it was invariably brought by the 4th hour, the time of the korban tamid of Shachar, of the morning tamid, is not till midday because it never was done till midday. And the Chachamim say no, that since you can technically bring it till midday, you can daven till midday. Why do we say the mincha prayer is done till the evening? The afternoon tamid korev can be brought from after the noon until evening. Rabbi Yehuda says a plaga mincha until the 1 1/4 equivalent hours before sunset, half of the little mincha, what we talked about already. Because the afternoon korban can be brought until palaga mincha. In other words, think about it. It's the same thing that in the Beit HaMikdash there was a reason they worked with alacrity. Never was the Talmud brought after palaga mincha. But technically, halakhically, you could bring it if something happened. You could bring it till sunset. So according to the Chachamim, we go with the legal time. According to Rabbi Yehuda, we go with the time that they actually observe in the Beit HaMikdash. And indeed, with Shacharis, that's the halacha, that you should daven before 4 hours of the day. If not, you can daven till Chatzot. Why do we say that the evening prayer has no fixed obligation, that it is an optional voluntary prayer? Because it corresponds to something that didn't necessarily happen every day. It was a quiet day in the Beit HaMikdash that all the sacrifices would already have been burnt up by sunset. However, those limbs and fats who were not consumed mid-erev by the sunset, you continue to bring them and burn them on the altar the whole night till Amul Shachar, till the first light of dawn. But technically, you don't have to have extra stuff on the altar. And it's possible that you had a very quiet day in the Beit HaMikdash and it all was consumed before sunset. So since you didn't always have the extra burning of the leftover parts of the sacrifices on any given night, so it's optional because it's something you can do or not do on any given night because, this is not about the Shema, this is about the Shmon Esrei. Why do we say that the tefillah of Musaf is all day? Sharei korban shomusaf and korv kolayim. You can bring korban musaf all day as long as you conclude with the afternoon tamid. Rabbi Yehuda says till 7 hours, because even though technically you have all day to bring it in the Beis HaMikdash, korban musaf korv because the reality is that the musaf was brought until 7 hours into the day. That's the reality. It always brought until 7 hours into the day. One chafam on the base, Bobby, and the text is up. Michal put the text up there. So all the arguments to Yehuda have to do with the legal time of bringing the korbanos, as opposed to the time when they made a point of always bringing the korbanos by in the Beit HaMikdash. Now, what do we mean when we say plag hamincha? So to do this, we're going to define what we already discussed. What is the larger mincha? from 6.5 hours into the day and beyond. What is the little mincha? No, Mitasha shows from 9.5 hours and above. And plaga mincha is half of that time, an hour or a quarter. Now we're going to get into a whole discussion as to what plaga mincha means. Does it mean the dividing line? Does it mean the whole first half? Does it mean the second half? And more than that, when we say half of the mincha, maybe it means half of mincha gedola, half of the great mincha, from 12:30 to 3:30, from 6.5 hours a day to 9.5 hours a day. So we don't know the answer to any of those questions at the moment. See, the question was raised. Plaga mincha, kamar. When you say half of mincha, does Rabbi Yehuda mean until an hour and a half before the little mincha? No, is it half of the big mincha? So that would take you from 12:30 to 2, or plag mincha achreina, is it half of the later mincha, which is what we say. Toshima come in here. Rabbi Yehuda says plag mincha achreina. We have a brisa where he says he means half of the last mincha. And that is 10 3/4 hours, 11 hours minus a quarter hour before into the day, 1 1/4 hours before sunset. Doesn't this refute Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina's position? Why would this refute his position? Because it would seem that according to Rabbi Yehuda, plag mincha is because of the korbanos, right? So if it's because of the korbanos, then the avos, it's not because of the avos, because the only reason to do plag mincha is because that's when they finish bringing the korban. If you're talking about the afternoon, it's afternoon till sunset. And even though I believe that the tefillos come from our forefathers, I will tell you that the prayers were created by the Avos, and when the rabbis made it a formal siddur, a formal form of prayer, they attached it to the korbanos. Because if you're not going to say this, tefillos musaf, according to Rabbi Yosef B'Chanina, who made it? Because there's not 4 Avos, there's 3 Avos. Ella, what tefillos Avos did. The tefillos were established by the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, to pray at different times of the day. And when the Chachamim made a mandatory form of tefillah and a mandatory obligation to pray regularly, Asmechinu Rabbanim, the sages connected them to, they coupled them with the korbanos. So when the korbanos were brought in the Beit HaMikdash, people would pray in conjunction with those korbanos. So everyone agrees that there's a connection to the korbanos, because Musaf is corresponding, obviously, to the additional korbanos. But Rabbi Yosef Chanina holds that originally the original source of davening, morning, afternoon, and evening, is the practice of the Chachamim, which means to say that the Avos, that this was a broadly accepted practice throughout the period until the second Beit HaMikdash. When the Siddur was established in the second Beit HaMikdash, so they took these prayers that were already done by the forefathers and added to them a connection, both time-wise and conceptually, to the korbanos. Because you see that by mincha, right, that by musaf, what do we do in musaf? We talk about the korbanos that were brought on that particular day, whether it's Rosh Chodesh or Pesach or Sukkot and so on. Now, there's an interesting Tosfos. Tosfos says that the prayer of Avram is when he quotes the Gemara in Yoma. There's a prayer of Avram is when the walls darken. In other words, when you have shadows cast by the sun in the afternoon. So how could it be? But I thought Avram established chakras. So Tosfos answers that Avram and Yitzchak overlapped a great deal, because Avram died at 175 and Yitzchak was born when he was 100. So after Yitzchak established Mincha, Avram also started davening Mincha. And therefore, Avram prayed in the afternoon after Yitzchak established the idea of an afternoon prayer. Now, what's interesting is another interesting point where the Kiva Eger brings down that that we say that ein sicha ela tefillah because that sicha means tefillah, and we bring a proof from Tilim tefillah on the kiyam v'nei Hashem yishpech sicha. So in the Shiltos of Rabbi Chai, which is a very early post-Talmudic, in other words, it basically contains sections of the Gemara divided according to the parsha of the week that Rabbi Chai used to teach each week to give over the halachas. So it's somewhere between the Gemara. It's from the times of the Savaroyim. It's between the Gemara and the Gaonim. And there's a lot of variations there from our Gemara. And one of them is, according to Shiltas Rabbi Chai, we learn it out from Eshbech Lefanav Sichi, that Hashem said, that it says in Tilim, I'll pour out my speech before Hashem, which obviously is an expression of tefillah. It's just an interesting note that there are alternate places where sicha means tefillah. Another Tosfos who says that that Yaakov went back to pray. He turned back towards Har HaBayis when he got to Charan because he saw he passed over that place where his forefathers had prayed, which would seem one doesn't travel by night, so it's still day. So Tosfos says from here we can find support to the idea that we daven Ma'ariv while it's still a little bit light and then go repeat Shema again. Just an interesting point where Tosfos finds support in the Medrash about Yaakov turning back towards the Har HaBayis to support the idea of davening Ma'ariv a little bit early. And the reason they did this is because they wanted to be able to get home when it was still light. They didn't have street lights and stuff. So they would daven Ma'ariv as we do in our shul early, and then they would say Shema at the biblical time later. Okay, now just another interesting point. One other thing here. So there's another. I want to go back. There's just several very interesting Tosfot here. So we said that we don't make you go back for Avdallah because you're going to make in davening because you're going to make it on the coast. So the Tosfot says a question: why don't you answer before they decreed to make it on the coast? Because originally the Anshe Knesset and Gola said we say Havdalah verbally, based on the biblical obligation to do so, but they created a nusach. Then later, when they became richer and they could afford wine, they decreed that to give Havdalah its proper respect, like Kiddush, we're going to make it on wine. So why don't we say that this idea that you have to go back if you miss Atachon Antonu, if you miss Havdalah, is before they decreed to make it on wine, right? Because then you would have to go back because you're not going to say it on wine later because there was no such decree. So Tosfos makes a point, a very historical point. He says that there's no Braita that was taught between those two Takanot. In other words, that we don't find any Braitot from that time period, from when they used to make Havdalah only verbally and not on wine. So therefore, we can't say that this Bryce is talking about a case where you don't make it on wine. And Tosfos is obviously correct on this because the Brachot were all taught much later than the Takana of the sages to make Havdalah on wine, which is relatively early in the second period. So, in the second, so Tosfos negates an answer because of a historical point that it would not be possible to suggest that a Braita was taught to us before the decree to make Havdalah on wine, because the Braitot do not come from that time period. That time period is too early for the Braitot. So we see here that Tosfos understands a piece of Gemara on the basis of a historical fact related to when things were redacted, which is very interesting. Okay, I wish you all a wonderful day. We do meet tomorrow, but not Thursday. And we have one Parsha class this week, which is on Friday, Mitzvah Shem, at 11:30. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care, Bobby. Take care, Michal. Take care, anyone watching this on YouTube.
Rabbi?
Yes.
On Fridays, they have a standing meeting from 10 to 12.
So I'll send out. So we'll try to switch it back to 12 because Fridays work best because I'm almost never away on a Friday except like last week where I went away. So let me try to switch it to 12 and see what happens. But
Okay.
but so I think what I'll do is I'll switch it. Well, actually, the email goes on. Whatever. I'll send out an email and we'll see what happens. Okay. Cool.
Thank you very much.
All the best. Yeah.